Let's make an observation. If let's say n equals 5, in order to compute f5, we need to know the values of f4 and f3. But in order to compute f4, we also need to know the values of f3 and f2. And in order to know f3, we need f2 and f1. And for f2, we need f1 and f0. So in order to achieve our goal and compute f5, we will start from f0 and f1, which we know, and we should compute each and every Fibonacci number from f2, then f3, f4, and f5 in this specific order. In the general case, if we want to compute fn, we should have computed fn-1 and fn-2 beforehand. But in order to compute fn-1, we should have computed fn-2 and fn-3 beforehand. And so on and so forth. In order to compute f2, we will use f1 and f0. So again, we start from f0 and f1, we use them to compute f2, then we use this f2 along with f1 to compute f3, then we use f2 and f3 to compute f4, and so on and so forth, until at the last step we will use fn-2 and fn-1 to compute fn. So basically, for every index I from 2 to n, we have to apply the Fibonacci formula. How can we iterate through these indices? Of course, using a for loop. We will have our for loop where for each index I between 2 and n, we will compute fi using the Fibonacci formula. But in order to achieve this, we need of course the values of fi-1 and fi-2. So we will use two variables to store them. Current, which will store the last computed Fibonacci number, which is basically fi-1 at this step of the for loop, and previous, which will store the second to last computed Fibonacci number, which is basically fi-2 at this step in the for loop. Now let's take a look at the code. We will initialize prev with 0 as it signifies f0 and current with 1 as it signifies f1. Then, we will check the special case where n equals 0, and if so, we will return 0. Then, the special case where n equals 1, and if so, we will return 1. Otherwise, if n is greater than 1, then we will have our for loop in which we iterate through every index I between 2 and n. Inside this loop, we should compute fi, the current Fibonacci number, and store this value into the variable current, and we should also update the previous variable with fi-1, which will be the previous Fibonacci number. So first, we will compute the sum between current and previous and store it in a variable next. Then, we will update previous with current, so previous is now fi-1, and then we will update current with next, so current now is fi. After the for loop terminates, previous will store the value of fn-1, and current will store the value of fn, which is the desired answer, so we will return current. Now let's see how this works on an example. Let's say n equals 6, so we want to compute f6. Previous is initially 0, current is initially 1. Is n equal to 0? No. Is n equal to 1? No. So we start the for loop. I is initially 2. Next will be current plus prev, which is 1. Prev will now become 1, and current will now become 1. Then we move to the next step. I equals 3. Next becomes 1 plus 1, which is 2. Prev is assigned value 1, so it stays 1. And current becomes 2. Next step, I equals 4. Next is now 1 plus 2, which is 3. Previous is now 2, and current is now 3. Next step, I is 5. Next is 5. Prev is 3, and current is 5. Next step, I is 6. Next is 8. Prev is 5, and current is 8. And the for loop finishes execution. In the end, we return current, which is 8, and is indeed our desired answer.